Welcome to the Hindu Daily. We are going sequentially through 8 fascinating sources today, exploring how massive systems around you, from global energy grids and digital supply chains to the hidden rules of mountain birds and human governance, are being completely rewired.
Yeah, and it's a critical time to be paying attention to this stuff. I mean, we are looking at a world where the foundational rules are pretty much being rewritten in real time.
Right.
And often these shifts happen so quietly, like they're buried in technical legislative language or, complex data models, but they carry massive implications for how your daily life actually functions.
Absolutely. So let's start right in the editorial section, looking at India's energy grid,
Hmm.
because the numbers here are just staggering.
Oh, they really are.
In the 2025-26 budget speech, the finance minister announced this astronomical leap. They want to take India's installed nuclear power capacity from 8,180 megawatts to 100 gigawatts by 2047.
Which is, yeah, a huge jump.
Yeah, right. And to make this happen, the government is introducing the SHANTI Act.
Yeah.
Because let's unpack this. Because they are essentially acting with a legislative sledgehammer here.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
They are repealing both the 1962 Atomic Energy Act and the 2010 Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act. And the explicit goal is to break the absolute monopoly of the Department of Atomic Energy. So finally allowing private and foreign investment into the sector.
Right.
But, I mean, I have to push back on the ambition of this target a little. Currently, nuclear makes up a tiny 1.8% of our total capacity.
Yeah, and it contributes just about 3% of our actual power.
Exactly. Meanwhile, our renewable sector is facing massive headwinds. Like, there are 40 gigawatts of solar and wind projects just languishing without purchase contracts. So isn't nuclear notoriously slow to build and incredibly expensive?
It definitely have that reputation, yeah.
So how do we jump to 100 gigawatts without bankrupting the entire energy system?
Well, what's fascinating here is the underlying math of what they are calling the three-front strategy. Because to reach the developmental goal of Viksit Bharat by 2047 and, net zero emissions by 2070, you can't just look at production. You have to look at baseline consumption.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
So right now, India's per capita electricity generation is just over 1,400 kilowatt hours. China is over 7,000, and the U.S. is over 12,000.
Oh, wow, that is a massive gap.
Exactly. And closing that gap without relying heavily on fossil fuels requires steady, massive baseload power. You simply cannot rely entirely on solar and wind for baseload.
Because they're intermittent, right? Like the sun isn't always shining.
Right. And maintaining the physical inertia of a national power grid requires constant, unyielding voltage. Renewables just can't provide that stability on their own. Plus, solar arrays require roughly 10 times more land mass to generate the equivalent power of a thermal or nuclear plant.
10 times.
Yeah, it's incredibly land intensive.
So we need dense, constant power. But what about the, I think it's $200 billion this is going to cost? Where does the SHANTI Act actually fit into building these plants faster and cheaper?
Well, the SHANTI Act is designed specifically to unlock that private capital by fundamentally changing how we build the reactors. The first front deals with foreign designs, like the French or American models.
Which are super expensive.
Very, upwards of $5 million per megawatt. So those have to be heavily indigenized to lower costs. The second front aggressively pushes small modular reactors, or SMRs, and specifically utilizing India's vast domestic thorium reserves to bypass the really complex traditional breeder reactor route.
Okay.
But the third front is the most crucial for the timeline. It's about taking India's already proven indigenous 220 megawatt reactors and fully modularizing them.
Meaning, like, instead of building a massive custom reactor from scratch over 10 years on site.
You manufacture standardized components in a factory.
Exactly.
And then just ship them to the location and assemble them. That is the exact mechanism. By standardizing the parts, heavy private industries like think steel manufacturers, cement plants, or massive data centers, they could replace their captive, high-polluting coal plants with these reliable nuclear workhorses. Modularization is the key to cutting construction time down to just 40 months.
Wow, 40 months is fast. It's deeply ironic, though, that while a nation might successfully rewrite its domestic laws to build a cohesive energy future, the systems governing our global coordination are simultaneously fracturing.
Yeah, that's very true.
Moving to our second editorial piece, we see this exact fracture at the World Trade Organization's 14th Ministerial Conference in Cameroon.
Right, MC14.
2 massive, decades-old international moratoriums just collapsed. First, the 1998 ban on e-commerce tariffs, and second, the 1995 ban on TRIPS non-violation complaints. It's like the world agreed not to build toll booths on the internet back in 1998, and now suddenly countries are rushing to set up digital roadblocks.
Yeah, it's a major shift.
But before we get into the internet tolls, for those of you listening who don't spend your weekends reading international trade law, what exactly is a TRIPS non-violation complaint?
Right. So TRIPS stands for Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights. It is basically the global baseline for protecting patents.
Okay.
The collapse of this moratorium exposes developing nations to profound legal risks. Under current WTO rules, a developed country can now file a formal complaint if a developing nation passes a perfectly legal public health law.
Wait, really? Even if it's legal?
Yes. For example, a law designed to produce affordable, life-saving medicine for its own citizens. The developed country doesn't even have to prove a rule was broken.
That's wild.
They simply have to claim that the new domestic law nullifies the anticipated financial benefits of their pharmaceutical intellectual property.
That sounds incredibly destabilizing for any nation trying to protect its citizens' health.
Absolutely.
And this split reality applies to the internet now, too. We have this deeply fragmented legal framework where the WTO essentially allows tariffs on digital trade, while a separate, exclusive agreement signed by 66 nations completely prohibits those same customs duties.
Yeah, the e-commerce plurilateral agreement.
Right. And India actually opposed including that plurilateral agreement at the WTO, did they?
They did, yeah. Primarily arguing that there are no structural legal safeguards to incorporate these sort of exclusive club-like agreements into the broader consensus-based WTO framework.
I see.
But look at the historical pattern here. Whenever multilateralism, like everyone agreeing at the WTO, stalls, we see a sharp rise in coercive unilateralism.
Like what?
Well, the classic example is the U.S. Trade Act of 1974. It authorized the U.S. president to take unilateral punitive action against any perceived unfair trade practices, bypassing global consensus entirely.
Wow.
So the failure in Cameroon leaves the WTO struggling to handle 21st century challenges, accelerating this trend where major powers simply abandon global treaties and enforce their own trade rules.
It is wild to see how humans completely fail to coordinate our global resources through these massive fragile treaties, while nature manages to optimize global resource distribution without a single negotiation.
Yeah, nature's pretty efficient that way.
Let's pivot to the science section, because there is a new paper in Science Advances challenging everything we thought we knew about mountain birds. The old textbook idea was simple, right? Birds migrate to escape the cold.
That's what we were all taught, yeah.
But new citizen science data collected across 34 mountain regions globally shows they actually migrate to optimize their energy budgets. Oh, wait, I have to push back on this finding.
Okay.
The data says some of these birds are actually moving upslope in the winter, going directly against the temperature gradient. That sounds like walking past 3 perfectly good warm restaurants to go stand in the freezing cold at a food truck, just to avoid a line.
That food truck analogy actually captures the underlying behavioral economics of these birds perfectly. Yeah, we have to look at the mechanism of the SEDS model. That's the Seasonally Explicit Distributions Simulator. In equatorial mountains, the physical temperature actually changes very little across seasons.
Oh, interesting.
So if the thermometer isn't pushing them, what is? It comes down to food availability and the high cost of interspecies competition.
Right.
An energy budget is simply the finite amount of calories a bird has available for staying warm, foraging for food, and rearing its young.
So standing in the cold at the food truck is a calculated evolutionary choice.
Exactly.
It's actually cheaper, energy-wise, to burn a few extra calories staying warm if it means you aren't burning massive amounts of energy fighting a giant crowd for a scarce meal down below.
That is exactly what the data reveals. Tarun Menon's recent research in the Himalayas provides the empirical proof for this. He found that in the winter, insect populations are actually denser at lower elevations.
Okay.
But in the summer, those insects become much more abundant at higher elevations. The birds are simply tracking the shifting calorie availability.
That makes so much sense.
The SEDS model even ran a simulation where they placed birds in an entirely empty mountain range. As the bird populations grew and competition increased, migration naturally emerged as the most energy-efficient survival strategy.
Wow, it's just pure optimization.
Yeah, and interestingly, when researchers applied worst-case climate change scenarios for the year 2100 to this model, it predicted these birds would only need to shift their range upslope by about 129 meters.
Only 129 meters.
Right. The ultimate limiting factor for their survival isn't the ambient temperature. It is the availability of resources.
That perfectly connects the concept of nature's self-correcting systems to the self-correcting systems of human governance. Or rather, what happens when a human system loses its structural ability to self-correct?
Yeah, that's a sharp transition.
Moving into our text and context section, we have to look impartially at a massive constitutional milestone. Prime Minister Modi recently completed 8,931 days as an elected head of government.
Which officially surpasses the record previously held by Pawan Kumar Chamling.
Exactly. And this brings up a foundational constitutional dilemma. India has no executive term limits. Unlike the systems in the US, South Korea, or Brazil, there is no hard cap on how long one person can hold the office wielding actual executive power. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
B.R. Ambedkar, back in 1948 during the Constituent Assembly debates, argued that India didn't need term limits. He said it was because the legislature's daily no-confidence motions acted as a rolling, continuous check on the executive.
Right, a daily vulnerability.
Exactly. It's like trusting the brakes on a car to stop you from crashing. But then the 1985 anti-defection law, 10th schedule, essentially cut those brake lines by forcing legislators to always vote with their party whip or face immediate disqualification.
Yeah, and when you neutralize that daily parliamentary accountability, you fundamentally alter the structural balance of power.
Right.
Studies on prolonged incumbency in democratic systems show a clear pattern. Extended executive tenure allows for compounding control over systemic levers.
What kind of levers?
Well, this means cumulative influence over appointments to regulatory bodies, the election commission, the higher judiciary, and an outsized capacity to shape the national information environment.
Which makes sense. The longer you are there, the more people you appoint.
Exactly. Now, to examine this impartially, we must acknowledge the strongest counterargument, which is the democratic mandate itself.
The voters.
The electorate has explicitly endorsed this tenure 3 consecutive times. Mandating a term limit would, by definition, forcefully override the expressed preference of the voters.
Right. A term limit is inherently a restriction on who the voters are legally allowed to choose to represent them.
That is the core tension. However, Ambedkar's original design relied on the dual mechanism of periodic elections combined with daily parliamentary vulnerability.
And we lost the daily part.
Without that daily safety valve, national elections are forced to carry a much heavier burden of accountability. This structural shift is sparking serious data-driven discussions among constitutional scholars about systemic reforms.
Like what kind of reforms?
For instance, there are proposals suggesting that votes on confidence motions should be strictly exempt from the anti-defection law. This would allow individual legislators to vote their conscience and check the executive without forfeiting their elected seats.
That's a really interesting proposal. Now, while India is grappling with the long-term structural endurance of its political leadership, China has spent decades engineering the long-term structural endurance of its economy against global shocks.
They really have.
Also, in text and context, we look at the fallout from the ongoing Israel-U.S. war on Iran. While India immediately faced LPG shortages and fuel panics, China seemed completely unaffected.
Not a scratch.
Right. They have built a 120-day strategic petroleum reserve, constructed massive pipelines importing oil and gas directly overland from Central Asia and Russia, deliberately bypassing the highly vulnerable Malacca Strait. And their current economic slowdown, maintaining a modest 4.5% growth target, has naturally suppressed their total energy demand.
It's a perfect storm of insulation.
So it makes me question the global narrative. Is China's massive state-sponsored push for green tech and electric vehicles less about saving the planet and more of a calculated geopolitical shield to protect them from oil supply chain panics?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the data suggests the strategy is overwhelmingly geopolitical.
Yeah.
China recognized its critical vulnerability, a choke point they explicitly referred to as the Malacca dilemma decades ago.
Okay.
The strategic mechanism they used to solve it is remarkable. During the early global climate negotiations, China actively helped form the basic bloc. That's Brazil, South Africa, India, and China. They did this specifically to negotiate as a unified front and protect their right to carbon-heavy industrial development.
Right, because they're developing nations.
But China uniquely leveraged its status as the world's largest polluter to extract concessions, leading to the 2008 U.S.-China Framework Cooperation.
What did that framework do?
That specific agreement forced the vital knowledge and technology transfers that allowed Beijing to build the industrial foundation for their absolute global dominance in solar panels, wind energy, and electric vehicles today.
So they essentially used the leverage of their own massive pollution problem to legally acquire the proprietary tech they needed to dominate the global solution.
That is the mechanics of the strategy, yes.
Wow.
And when you combine that green tech dominance with the aggressive maneuvering of their national oil companies, who proactively secured diverse long-term oil contracts in highly volatile conflict zones like Sudan and Angola, you see a cohesive plan.
They diversified everywhere.
China has successfully turned its massive energy dependency into a heavily diversified strategic advantage that insulates them from exactly the kind of catastrophic supply shocks we're seeing right now in West Asia.
But while China successfully insulated its physical supply chains, it seems our digital supply chains are completely exposed to disastrous vulnerabilities.
Oh, this story is terrifying.
It really is. Our final piece in Text and Context details a highly sophisticated supply chain attack on the Axios NPM package.
Right?
For context, if you aren't a programmer, when you tell a computer to build a website, it automatically goes to a digital library and pulls down thousands of little tools to help it function. Axios is one of those tools, downloaded millions of times a week by developers to help websites fetch data.
It's everywhere.
Last week, hackers stole an Axios maintainer's password, quickly changed the recovery email to an untraceable Proton Mail address, and locked the real owner out. Then, they quietly uploaded a malicious package called PlainCrypto.js and just left it sitting there, hidden, for 18 hours.
Just waiting.
Finally, they pushed a poisoned update to the main Axios code. It's like a thief stealing the master keys to the doorknob factory and quietly installing a hidden backdoor in every single lock shipped out to every home that day.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
And this completely bypassed all automated security testing. Developers who pulled a routine, seemingly safe update accidentally installed a self-destructing remote access Trojan.
The operational sophistication here is terrifying because it exploits the core architecture of the internet. The fundamental flaw is that the entire open-source ecosystem relies heavily on automated trust.
Right, computers trusting computers.
When a developer installs an update, their system doesn't check every line of code. It automatically pulls down all listed dependencies, including that hidden plain crypto.js package.
Does it have the Trojan?
Exactly. This specific remote access Trojan is designed to hand full administrative control of the infected machine directly to the attacker.
Oh, wow. So they get everything.
Everything. This grants them immediate access to proprietary production databases, private API keys, and sensitive user data.
So what should developers do?
The actionable takeaway for anyone listening who operates in tech or manages digital infrastructure is absolute. If any of your systems downloaded Axios version 1.14.1 or 0.30.4, you must assume full network compromise.
Assume the worst.
Yes, you have to roll back your systems to previous safe versions immediately, and you must rotate every single exposed API key, SSH key, and database password that infected machine ever touched.
That level of digital stealth and consequence is just staggering. But let's bridge that to the highly visible, yet arguably hollow, actions of nations on the global stage.
The diplomacy angle.
Moving to the foreign section, China has been stepping up its diplomacy regarding the Iran-U.S. war. They just put forward a 5-point proposal, heavily coordinated with Pakistan, calling for an immediate end to hostilities. And they're actively opposing a UN proposal that would authorize the use of force to forcibly open the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
But former U.S. diplomats are dismissing this entirely as performative messaging. They're comparing it directly to China's incredibly vague 12-point peace plan for Ukraine.
So what does this all mean? Are they actually deploying diplomatic capital to stop a war? Or are they just putting up a giant diplomatic billboard that says China loves peace right before President Trump visits Beijing in May? Impartially analyzing their economic incentives, China's motivations are highly pragmatic but constrained.
How so?
Because they have insulated their energy supply chains so effectively, as we discussed, they currently rely on Iran for only about 13% of their total oil imports, and they utilize their own domestically flagged vessels for transport. So they're not facing an immediate existential crisis from the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz.
They've padded themselves.
Exactly. However, the structural reality is that China's entire growth model is deeply reliant on global exports. A protracted global energy shock would severely depress global demand for Chinese goods.
Because everyone else would be suffering.
Right, which would critically damage their already vulnerable, slowing economy. So they genuinely do not want this conflict to escalate.
But the U.S. isn't buying the mediation attempt.
No, because at the same time, the diplomatic theater is undeniable. The U.S. remains entirely unenthusiastic about allowing Beijing to step in, mediate a complex crisis, and claim a massive historic diplomatic victory in West Asia.
So the stalemate.
Pretty much. Therefore, China issues a 5-point proposal, which signals their intent to the global south without requiring them to actually enforce a peace.
It is massive orchestrated geopolitical theater. But for our final story today, I want to move from that global stage to a highly orchestrated, deeply personal event featured in today's Spotlight section.
This is a great piece.
It really is. This is an event that is actively changing lives on the ground in Delhi right now. Picture this scene. The Zora Convention Center on Lodi Road. 51 brides dressed in varying vibrant shades of red.
All at once?
All at once. Simultaneous wedding rituals happening across the floor, 51 pandits chanting Sanskrit, fog machines pumping heavy smoke, and indoor fireworks going off to celebrate.
Sounds incredible.
It is. This is the Ladley Foundation's Shagun initiative. It provides entirely funded mass weddings for marginalized families. The explicit goal is to save these families from ruinous debt and the horrific realities of the dowry system. And it is vital context for our listeners to know that Delhi recorded 114 official dowry deaths in 2023 alone.
It's a tragic, systemic issue.
It is. And the juxtaposition in this convention room is incredible. On one hand, you have deeply rooted traditions and superstitions. For instance, one bride explained she plans to stay entirely indoors for a full year after the wedding, simply to invite Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, into her new home.
Very traditional.
Very traditional. But simultaneously, as part of the ceremony, these young women are handed brand new laptops, 1 lakh rupee, fixed deposits in their own names, and dedicated vocational support.
It's a real safety net.
Right. Take 19-year-old Rukmini, for example. She's getting married in this highly traditional setting, largely within her own biradri or community network, but she is planning to use her new laptop to finish her Avian university degree and become a teacher.
This raises an important question about the macroeconomic trends that are forcing these cultural adaptations.
Yeah.
If we ground this vibrant scene in systemic demographic data, India's total fertility rate is dropping rapidly. Nationally, it is down to 1.9, but in an urban center like Delhi, it has plummeted to 1.2.
Wow, that's well below replacement level.
Yes. The rising cost of urban living is making traditional, massive Indian weddings financially impossible for many marginalized families. The pressure of dowry and celebration costs often forces families to liquidate whatever meager property they own, plunging them into generational debt.
So they literally can't afford to get married the traditional way.
Exactly. Initiatives like Shagun are stepping in to fill that massive, dangerous societal gap. What makes this a brilliant systemic intervention is how it functions mechanically. It addresses a whole spectrum of critical issues simultaneously.
Right.
It actively prevents female feticide and dowry deaths by removing the financial burden of a daughter. It mandates police verification of the grooms to protect the brides.
Oh, that's smart.
It is, and it provides education tools and health insurance. But crucially, it achieves all of this by packaging modern, financial female empowerment within a culturally acceptable, highly traditional framework.
It is a perfect, tangible example of a social system adapting when the economic and cultural pressure simply becomes too much to bear.
And that brings us to the core thread connecting every single source we have examined today. We have seen how systems, whether it's the legal framework of global trade rules at the WTO, the complex digital code powering the underlying architecture of the internet, or deeply ingrained social traditions like the dowry system, they are ultimately only as strong as the hidden assumptions supporting them.
That's very true.
When the code gets hacked, or the climate irrevocably changes the availability of natural resources, or the economic burden of tradition becomes too heavy for a family to carry, the system has to adapt.
It forces a change.
And it almost always does so in ways we never could have predicted. It leaves you wondering, what foundational system in your own life, something you completely rely on every single day, is quietly shifting right now, just waiting for you to notice?
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we're eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.